So on this video, I'm going to talk about some of the key things to remember as an expat investor or somebody who wants to manage their finances in a more productive way whilst they're overseas. Now, I have been running my company now since 2018, and I've been producing content for over 10 years, and I've been living overseas now for over 14 years. So I know the expat finance scene inside out, and you can see more on adamfire.com. Now let's start with investing. What are the key things you have to understand as an expat? First of all, portability is key. If you're moving from country to country, or even you're going to move back home, you do not want to be in a situation where your accounts are closed down every time you move from country to country. You don't want to be in a situation as well where you have to lie to your bank or brokerage account and still use your parents' address or your correspondent address in the UK or Canada or the US or whatever. So it's important to use expat-focused brokerage accounts where you can actually move your money seamlessly across borders. Now, what kind of options exist in that space? Interactive brokers are very good when it comes to those kind of accounts for do-it-yourself investors. However, one thing I have learned from all these years overseas is DIY investing. It works until it doesn't. What do I mean by that? The biggest risk in investing isn't the markets, it's yourself. So most people will say, oh, I can invest by myself. I know the facts. I can just buy the S&P 500 ETF. But that works until it doesn't. Because in the real world, what often happens is there'll be a crash. Like in 2020 after COVID, or even 2022 after Russia and Ukraine. And so often people will actually panic sell when those things happen. Even people who say that they won't do that often do that. So for example, in the 2020 crash, a study showed that 40% of over 65s panic sold between February 2020 and April 2020. So they crystallized their declining stock market portfolios. And if they would have just waited, they would have not suffered at all. Markets are much higher now than they were then. And even by the end of 2020, markets were much higher. So why does this happen? Well, Sir John Templeton once said that this time is different are the 4 most dangerous words in investing. And what often happens is people think to themselves, usually I shouldn't time the markets, but this time is different because of COVID or because of this or that or whatever. And what is true is often things will happen which are different to any time in the past. So for example, the pandemic was different to anything that's happened before in most of our lifetime. Although anyone who looked at the history books would know that the stock markets went up during the Spanish flu pandemic, which happened during the same time as World War I. And most people would be surprised to know the markets went up during a period where there were 2 awful events, but that happened. So in reality, even though you can actually see if you Google that usually the stock markets don't go down during pandemics or wars or government shutdown, whenever something happens, people panic. So during the moments when the markets are doing very well, most people can be patient, they can buy and hold. When the markets are doing badly, that's when people panic, even if they know they shouldn't. And I think the key reason for this is from an evolutionary standpoint, we have had to always be very fearful. If you think about it, historically, if a tiger's coming towards us or something like that, we have to be very alert to danger. So when the markets are going down, that's much more painful than the reward of markets going up. So psychologists have shown, it's called loss aversion, that a decline is at least twice as painful as a gain is pleasurable. So that's why, or one of the reasons why people panic sell, but also the media. Whenever there's any crisis, the media tends to, get involved and really try to put fear into people's hearts. Now, how can you deal with this? One way to deal with this is just to realize you're more likely to be like this and just set up systems whereby you do things like you don't log into your account when you know there's a market crash. Another thing you can do is use an advisor. Now, Vanguard has done a study. It's called Advisors Alpha. And bear in mind, Vanguard, the Vanguard group make just as much money if you buy their funds on Interactive Brokers compared to buying through an advisor. But what the Vanguard studies have shown, and you can Google Investment Advisor Alpha Vanguard to actually, see the study, they have shown that people who are advised clients get up to 2 or 3% more per annum investing in the same Vanguard funds as if they invest by themselves. And you might say, how is that possible? Because an advisor is charging 1% per annum. And if they're going into the same Vanguard funds, how is that possible that the clients are making more? Well, it's simple. Think about it. If you're trying to get fit, when are you going to actually take action? Are you more likely to take action if you've got a gym membership with a gym trainer and you know that every Tuesday and Thursday you've got an appointment with the trainer? When it comes to learning a language, are you more likely to learn a language if you've got a trainer compared to doing it by yourself? It's fairly obvious, right? So with an advisor, that advisor can work with you, and during the tough moments can be that person who's saying, well, this is a great time to buy. You should be buying, not selling. And if you respond and say, oh, my wife or my husband or whatever is getting worried, or my friends are saying, oh, this or this, the advisor can, at least if they're a good advisor, can say, well, yes, that's true, but this is a very typical mistake. You need to stay invested. So advised clients are more likely not to panic sell and even to double down on investing during those tough moments. Whereas do-it-yourself clients are much more likely to panic sell during those moments. Now, speaking about DIY investing, one thing that has become more difficult is bond market investing. Bond funds don't usually perform very well compared to stocks, but historically bonds have done well compared to now. In other words, many years ago, you could easily make 5, 6, 7% per annum in bond funds. Even in the early 2000s, you could make good money investing in US treasuries. That era has ended. Government bonds are now riskier than before because of higher government debt. So there are better options available via advisors on advisory platforms when it comes to income producing assets. Now, moving on from investing, and let's talk about banking. So if you're overseas, again, you should want a portable bank that moves with you from country to country. However, I've noticed that Wise is very likely to close down your account, especially if you're a business owner, but even to a certain extent if you're an individual and you're spending a lot of money. So the fintech companies like Wise or Revolut, they can work pretty well for most people in most circumstances. However, if you use them too much, sometimes they're more likely to put restrictions on your account. But when it comes to business owners in particular, I've noticed they're more likely to be strict and close down people's accounts. It's never happened to me, but I've lost count of the number of people who have had this issue. And that leads me to another thing. And that's that as a business owner globally, you should always have 2 or 3 bank accounts. It's insurance. Even if it costs you extra money, it is an insurance against, being closed off. Because every business owner that I know internationally who is in certain industries like financial services has from time to time had a bank say to them, well, actually, we're no longer accepting your account because your industry is too high risk. Now, when it comes to things like online gambling or any riskier industries and financial services, it's even more likely to happen. Crypto is another example. So always get 2 or 3, ideally at least 3 bank accounts as a business owner. Even as an individual, you should probably have at least 2, ideally, 2 offshore accounts for your money. And yes, you could have an account in your home country, but that could be a backup account. Now, when it comes to residency, which is another thing to look at, these days things have got stricter compared to when I was first overseas. When I was first overseas, the CRS didn't exist. That's the Common Reporting Standard. So in 2011, when I first went overseas, you could open up an account and you didn't need to put down your tax number on application forms. Some providers might have requested that, but it wasn't a regulatory requirement. Now it is, and it has been like that for some time. What's more, new reporting frameworks are always coming out for different types of assets. So for example, the CARF, that's C-A-R-F, that is linked to crypto. FATCA, that's for American people and assets. And the OECD are announcing that in 2 years, they're going to bring out a reporting framework for real estate. So real estate will be put into the net of the reporting authorities. So what that means is, if you're, say, a UK person or a Canadian or an American or whatever, governments can more easily actually track where you've got money around the world. Some people are delusional about crypto. Some people think crypto being in cold storage is actually a protection against this, but in reality it isn't. It can be traced. So the bottom line is, if you want confidentiality, if you want more confidentiality for your assets, then ultimately you've got to put proper structures in place. That doesn't mean crypto in cold storage. It doesn't mean a simple trust. It means proper structures. So I did an interview of Mark Morris, who has been featured in The Economist. He has also spoken to the EU Parliament. He's consulted for the OECD. He does very sophisticated structures. These things are going to become more important over time. However, what I would say is, don't consider structuring until you've got at least $500,000 or more in most cases. $250,000 might be okay for some structures, but for many structures you need $500,000 or sometimes much more than that to make it worthwhile. Now, speaking about more basic structures, one of the things that people could improve when it comes to their expat finances is named beneficiaries. What do I mean by named beneficiaries? If you're abroad and God forbid you were to die, and you have 2 or 3 or 4 properties in different parts of the world, and you have bank accounts in different parts of the world, it's going to be a mess when it comes to probate. Even if you've got wills in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different countries, basically you are essentially going to have to go through probate for sometimes a year or even 2 to get all the money back. In comparison, if you set up a structure or even use an insurance company, you can put your named beneficiaries, your loved ones, down on the application form, and the process is much simpler for actually getting the money back to those individuals. However, a lot of people don't do it because they don't want to think about the worst case, which leads me to another thing. And that's the things like health insurance, life insurance, disability, critical illness. Yes, it's boring, just like structures. It's not as exciting as investing in the next best thing. However, things like that can really make a difference to your life, because if you don't have enough assets to pay for your loved ones if something happens to you, spending just a small amount on your loved ones via an insurance that hopefully you'll never have to use can make a lot of sense. But ultimately, people don't like to think about the worst case in life. Now, going on to another topic. So let's say somebody has made a lot of money. They're a high net wealth individual or an ultra high net wealth individual. In that case, insurance is used for very different purposes. So when we think about insurance, we usually think about, it's something where you spend a small amount of money to insure yourself or something like your business, and you hope you're never ever going to have to use that insurance. And that is true, but for wealthier individuals, insurance is actually an asset class. I'll give you an example. Let's say you've got properties, land, businesses. You're asset rich, but you're cash poor. In that situation, what many wealthy people will do is they will buy an insurance policy. Let's say they'll put down $500,000 as a pure example to get $5 million of coverage. And from that $5 million or $500,000, they might even borrow against the policy, because borrowing against your assets is a very tax efficient strategy in certain countries. So for example, the likes of Elon Musk, he often borrows against his Tesla shares, and then he's living off borrowed income. Now that's obviously somebody who's the richest or one of the richest people in the world. But what you find is once people get beyond a certain threshold of wealth, it could be 5 million, 10 million, whatever, 15 million, more people think about these strategies. In other words, how to use insurance, but also how to use insurance in tandem with strategies like borrowing against your assets, also trusts, foundations, and all of these things. Okay, everyone, so that was a very long video, but it covered some of the key things to watch out for when it comes to being an expat. And a final bonus thing I would say is repatriation. So when you're going to move back to your country, obviously you want to repatriate the money in an efficient way, a tax efficient way. Now, as an expat, if you are from the UK in particular, and South Africa and Australia, there are tax efficient ways you can do this. I'll give you just one example on this video. For Australian expats, if you invest in a portfolio bond and you keep the policy open for 10 years or more continuously, you can repatriate that money to Australia when you are Australian resident again in a very tax efficient way. British people can also do that, but there's a 5% rule where once you go back to the UK, you can only withdraw 5% every year and defer the tax because of gross roll up. Now, this is a very technical area and this video is not formal tax or legal advice. But the point is, when you start to get a few more assets, don't just focus on things like fees versus investment returns. Obviously, focus on things like returns, don't get me wrong, but also focus on how you can optimize your assets in terms of gaining some of those tax benefits. Because, for example, if you're investing millions on interactive brokers, as a pure example, that's fine. And providing you're not panic selling or doing something silly, you might make a lot of money, potentially, right? But if you got that money, or even 200 or 300 or 400,000, and you plan to go back to Australia or the UK, you could save an absolute fortune potentially on tax. If you structure things in the right way, you could actually save more money than you're going to pay the advisor. And we've set up many structures like that. So always focus as well on your holistic situation. So don't just focus on fees, returns, tax. Don't just focus on one issue in isolation. Focus holistically on what's good for your situation.